Well, let's look at the pen from Veterans for Britain then, because they have said that the EU has finally come clean on the future UK-EU military objectives, but risks remain. They say some of the comments by Michel Barnier at the Berlin Security Conference a couple of days ago were welcome. They say in particular in saying any voluntary participation, the UK in European defence will confer rights and obligations in proportion to the level of this participation. They're saying that he's indicating that UK participation is on an ad hoc basis in missions, could generate corresponding engagement at the political level, and they think that's a good thing. Clarity is needed, they say, on this point, but it does seem that the approach is heading towards a flexible structure rather than seeking to tie the UK down in fixed EU treaty obligations. Well, I thought this speech was worth just going through in a little bit of detail, because I question whether that's exactly what was going on. What did he say? He said, more than 500 days ago, the United Kingdom took a sovereign decision to leave the European Union and bring to an end 44 years of common history. To many of us, this came as a shock. To many of us, this came as a great shock. It was a decision taken against the backdrop of a strategic repositioning by our American ally, which has gathered pace since the election of Donald Trump. We need to take our fate in our own hands. In the face of threats that are increasingly diverse, intrusive and global, the heads of state or government decided to defend their continent by making common cause, giving priority to the protection of 440 million citizens, corresponding to the demands from 3/4 of our compatriots who want Europe to play a bigger role in security issues. He said, for the first time since the failure of the European defence community in 1954, we are witnessing an unprecedented effort to establish a defence and security union. So again, he's not telling the truth, is he? Because the St. Malo summit, as we pointed out on our timeline, was an agreement between Tony Blair and Chirac, the French president. So how can there be a suggestion that Britain has always been against European defence cooperation when he cites this event? Just to read what it says on the timeline, British Prime Minister Tony Blair and French President Jacques Chirac signed the St. Malo Declaration to make the French-British axis the motor of EU's common security and defence policy. So it's impossible to say that Britain has never been behind EU military unification. It has been there from the very beginning.
From the very beginning, but of course hidden from the British public, because all of these meetings at the time invariably and the ancillary talks all took place in secret, and that's a subject we're going to come on to a little bit later.
Right, so what was this speech about? This was Barnier in full negotiation mode. He was laying out the potential consequences. So to suggest that Britain is not going to be part of the European Defence Agency, is not going to be part of Europol, is not going to have access to the European Defence Fund. This is all nonsense. He was putting out his, laying out on the table his cards effectively, excuse the pun. But how has the British media covered this? Well, let's have a look. Barnier's speech, Brexit, Britain to be kicked out of Europol, no mention of defence whatsoever. The speech was 99% about defence, no mention of defence in The Independent, no mention of defence in The Week, UK to be kicked out of Europol after Brexit, all focus on Europol, nothing on defence. But right along, Britain has said, this is going back a few months, UK plans treaty to remain inside Europol after Brexit. Even Europol says that Britain is going to be within Europol after Brexit. So the press and media absolutely refusing, once again, to engage on this issue of defence. Here is the Mail's take on it. Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson tears into Eurocrat Michel Barnier for accusing Britain of abandoning Europe in the fight against IS terrorists. Now, I've spent quite a bit reading what Barnier said. So here is what he said about IS. He said it was a decision that came 6 months after the French Minister of Defence issued a call for solidarity to all his European counterparts to join forces to fight the terrorism of Daesh. That's it. That was the word Daesh was used once in the entire speech, but the focus of the Mail and the focus of Gavin Williamson was to divert attention away from the defence issues. Absolutely. Let's not look at that in any way, shape or form. And I have to ask, Brian, Is there effectively a D notice on this issue in the mainstream press?
I think pretty close to it, Mike. If we give David a chance to speak on this one, and then I'm going to cover a little bit more about what's going on inside the Conservative Party. But what we are seeing is a complete shutdown. They are terrified that the truth is coming out now. There is no Brexit. Britain's military to be absolutely ripped apart in order to help create this unified EU military structure. And there's panic. We're even getting some people inside the Tory party now talking to us. This is unique. We've talked about the BBC starting to break ranks and pass information to the UK column. It's finally happened with the Tory party. David Scott, what do you make of it?
Well, he doesn't mention PESCO. I mean, it's strangely missing. This is the vehicle by which European military union is to be delivered, and PESCO has certain features which are extremely relevant. One of these is the arrangement for what they call third countries. That would be us, right? And it's built in from the very foundations of this, that third countries can be part of PESCO on a ad hoc basis, an a la carte basis. You can agree whatever level of involvement you want. So everything's therefore open for negotiation. And they've very much got their eye on British military capability as part of this, and they make that quite clear. And the other thing is the purpose of the whole PESCO process, the political purpose, is to be able to impose European will, European policy, European values and European interests in the neighbourhood. And the neighbourhood includes the Ukraine and Syria, amongst other places. Libya, quite possibly as well. So this is the military arm of a European foreign defence policy. So how can you be a third country in that and maintain any independence? It's completely incoherent.
Well, you can't, is the answer, I think.
That's certainly true. I'll also say that lady in our chat box, while you've been speaking, David, pointed out that the UK pledged £3.5 billion to EU defence research in July this year. So vast amounts of British money still being diverted straight into the European Union. This is not going to firms in Britain. This is not helping British people with jobs and the training. This is diverted straight into the very EU, which supposedly we're leaving.
Sorry, just do you wanted one final comment, David?
One final comment in praise of Brexit. What Brexit has done, for all the politicians are trying to subvert it since the hour it happened, what Brexit has done is flushed a lot of this into the open. Because all of this military union policy, there was a huge acceleration and there's a huge amount of writing being done in Europe, all from the day now Brexit happened. Because it's forced the policy, which was going along quite nicely under the radar, no one was noticing, very few were. It's forced it to be much more upfront, so we're starting to see it. So Brexit has many advantages, despite the politicians.
Yep.
Before we hand over to David Scott for matters north of the border, let's just have a look at how the Conservative Party works. This actually works for any party, but we're focused on the Tories in government. You need a leader, controllable, the so-called acceptable public face. You've got to have big funders, because who controls the Prime Minister? The people who fund the Tory party. So if you're a researcher, this is where you need to look. You need to watch the powerful Conservative lobbyists. We've got the banking industry, the defence industry, pharmaceuticals, construction, Google, Facebook, all in bed with the government. Conservative Friends of Israel, massive power. BICOM, another Israeli outfit, supporting the government. Then we have the chosen people, the cabinet. This is the inner party people. They're trusted, they're selected. This is the elite. We've got the central office, the so-called HQ, running things. We've got the PR team putting the spin on what they're doing, not the truth. We've got applied behavioural psychology now, immensely dangerous. This is being focused on the public, but of course it's also being used inside the party on activists and MPs themselves. We've got the Conservative associations. They're running the grassroots soldiers. These are people in love with the leader, and they're going to get out there doing the job. They're going to do whatever they're told because they believe in the party. And let's remember that policy is not coming from the civil service. The policy is coming in from those change agents, the Fabians, Common Purpose, Demos, Young Foundation. Very easy to research and see the power of these organisations. And then we've got the backbench MPs, and these really are the useful idiots. They're going to do as they're told. They're not part of the inner circle. And the whips are there to do what? Well, we know that the whips are there to collect the dirty little secrets to ensure that MPs do as they're told. How do we know that? We've got a senior Conservative MP, a chief whip from the Ted Heath era saying on camera, men came to us with problems and we fixed it so that they would do as they were told. And bottom of the pile, of course, is the Conservative voters, and they are the ones being deceived on a daily basis. If you don't believe what we're saying about the whips, have a look at this video of a speech by Anne Milton where she gives a lecture on the work of the whips, and really she tells us exactly that the whips are there to bully MPs to keep them in post. This is one quote. Former Chief Whip Tim Renton in his book said, "A good whip is not just a sergeant major, he or she is also a counsellor and a nanny. The whips listen everywhere, in the tea room, in the library, and watch who is talking to whom. And they also keep watch on who the journalists are talking to." So this is collecting the dirt, and this man has told us what it's used for. So it doesn't matter what party, that is the system in the Conservative Party. It works in the Lib Dems, it works in Labour, and I suspect, David, it would also be correct for the SNP.
Oh yes, the SNP have suspiciously iron discipline. We hear there's a lot of unhappiness in the ranks over many things. We'll come on to a few of them, but no one willing to stand up and be counted.
And that's fear, presumably?
That would appear to be fear. It's got all of the signs of fear. There's also a bit of cult of the leader about the party at the lower levels, but at the upper levels, well, I don't know. You would speculate that that there must be something keeping them in line, because there's so many problems and nobody is speaking out at the higher levels of that party.
Yeah. We're going to change subject completely now and move on to Grenfell Tower. The Grenfell Tower survivors are considering, they've issued a joint statement. I believe it's about 50 families and also a large number of other people affected by this have issued a joint statement saying that they are keen to boycott the inquiry unless certain things are done. They don't want Sir Martin Moore-Bick to be leading the inquiry alone. They want a proper panel of local people involved in the inquiry, because these are people that are actually qualified to take the evidence and understand the evidence, because they have been on the receiving end of the tenant management organisation for quite a long time. Now, in order to try to drive this, they've raised a petition on the government petitions website. The URL's at the top there. Call on the Prime Minister to take action to build public trust in the Grenfell Tower inquiry. They say bereaved families and survivors call on PM to exercise their powers under the Inquiries Act 2005 to appoint additional panel members with decision-making power to sit alongside the chair in the Grenfell Tower inquiry, to ensure those affected have confidence in and are willing to fully participate in the inquiry, to secure trust in an establishment we feel has been distant and unresponsive, and to avoid a collapse in confidence in the inquiry's ability to discover the truth. It's fundamental that the inquiry is not led by a judge alone. Panel members must be appointed with relevant background, expertise and experience and real understanding of the issues facing those affected. and also legal representatives of bereaved families see all evidence from the start and are allowed to question witnesses at the hearings. Now, as a rule, we don't normally support petitions, but I think in this case, I would encourage everybody that's watching and listening to sign that petition and give people all the help that they can give, because this issue does need proper scrutiny and a proper inquiry to take place. David, have you any thoughts?
I've one little bit of information for you, Mike. I received a letter from the Information Commissioner on the 23rd of November regarding a complaint I'd made concerning the refusal of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea to respond to a request for information. I'd asked them to release the structural engineer's report on the fire damage condition of Grenfell Tower. The complaint has been requested, requesting a structural engineer's report, they write. The Commissioner's decision is that the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea has breached Regulation 5.2 of the EIR, Environmental Impact Regulations, by failing to respond to the request. The Commissioner requires the public authority to take the following steps to ensure compliance. Issue a substantive response to the complainant under the terms of Regulation 5.1 of the EIR. This requires a public authority to either disclose the requested information or issue a refusal notice under the terms of the EIR, and it gives them 35 calendar days to do this. I'm waiting with interest.
And how much longer are you going to have to wait?
35 days from the 23rd of November, so just before Christmas, or just after Christmas, or round about Christmas. So,
okay, so hopefully by the time we come back after Christmas, we'll have an answer.
That would be the intention, yes. I'm hoping it'll be a Christmas present.
Okay, and what if they don't respond to this? I mean, they have responded to nothing on this issue so far, so if they don't respond to this, what's the Information Commissioner able to do at that point?
I think it goes to sort of essentially contempt of court type proceedings at that point. I'm not entirely clear on what his enforcement powers are, but I think they're quite substantial. So I'll try and get some information for you for the turn of the year if we don't have a response.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, Grenfell community suffering, many communities suffering across the UK. I'm going to put up a reminder that Melanie Shaw in prison for blowing the whistle on child abuse. Melanie desperately needs communication from the public. She's still suffering. There's the contact details. Send her a letter or just a postcard if you can manage that, because this really is this lady's lifeline.
Christmas cards might be appropriate.
And Christmas coming up, so Christmas cards as well.
Move on to named person scheme, and you wanted to highlight the NP Fringe. They seem to have put up a lot of documentation here.
Yes, there's 93 bits of evidence here. If we have time, I'll read out one of these cards.
Go ahead.
It says, our children, then 5, 7 and 8, were assaulted, bruised and abused and intimidated by school staff. Afterwards, the named person, head teacher or deputy head, we were never informed who, invented well-being and parenting concerns. I've never met the head teachers. These concerns were requested by the named person as a child assessment report and shared with the children's reporter without her knowledge of or consent. During the investigation, school staff shared incorrect information and opinion and purposefully lied to the police several times. They finish up here and say, we underwent intrusive investigation into our parenting skills, education provision, daily routines, whilst not knowing exactly the nature of the concerns at the time. Social work found no concerns whatsoever, the complete opposite. That is because the concerns were never true, only invented to protect school staff. All involve abuse the named person scheme for their own needs. So that's the nature of the abuse, the organisational, institutional abuse that named person opens up families to. This is just one of many concerns about the scheme. Now, this information was passed to the committee in the Scottish Parliament who was looking at the issue. Hopefully they read this and they were influenced by it, but for whatever reason, the committee has decided they cannot back the scheme in its current form with the current level of information provided by the government. So what they've said is excuse me, Mr. Dornan, who is the convener of the committee looking at this, He said a number of organisations have highlighted how crucial the operation of the code, this is the code of practice, is to the implementation of the bill. One of the issues here is the bill is so wide that it means everything and nothing. So the code of practice, which tells the professionals what they're expected to do, is hugely influential, and it means that there's not necessarily any parliamentary scrutiny to that level of detail or to subsequent changes it might undergo. He continues, indeed, some organisations have suggested that their support for the bill is contingent upon the contents of the code. Based on the evidence heard to date, the majority of the committee do not consider that they are able to make a decision on whether to recommend that the general principles of the bill approved at stage 1 until the Scottish Government has provided the committee with an authoritative draft of the code. So they're saying that they are not going to back the current version of the named person scheme without seeing all of the detail. They're not going to write the government a blank cheque. And for an SNP dominated committee, that is really quite remarkable.
Right, so that's fantastic news. Okay, well, let's look at the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry. A couple of stories from the BBC here. An orphan, I guess this is evidence coming into the inquiry. Orphanage boy molested in toilet cubicle, and then another one that a boy died from a beating following from a nun. But what's interesting is that Peter Cherby has has done a great job again, and he is highlighting that the inquiry chair in Scotland seems to have connections to big banks, David.
Yes, the work of the inquiry goes on, and Smilham House has revealed this is the place where there was 300 skeletons found in a mass grave, but they all died of natural causes, and although they weren't recorded, or most of them weren't recorded in official records, there's nothing to see here. That's Smilham House. The sort of abuse that's been recorded is just horrendous. Even before you get to sexual abuse, the children were beaten, they were stripped, they were tortured, they were locked in baskets, they were kept in laundry baskets, locked up in one case for 4 days. Just horrendous abuse, and this abuse led to the death of at least one child, and we must assume many more. So some information is coming out via the inquiry. It's doing some good, and it should be applauded for that. We have to remember that only 300 or so survivors have actually contacted the official inquiry, and this is one of the problems. It's not gained the trust of the victims and survivors. But such information as it's providing, we should welcome. But again, the head of the inquiry, Lady Smith, a woman that we've got major concerns about because of her conduct over the Holly Gregg Robert Greene affair, where we've called on her to release the tape of Robert Greene's trial to see what's actually on that tape, because the official court records, we're convinced, based on 5 or 6 independent witnesses who were all in court at the time, the official record of that trial has been altered. Now, there is an audio tape. The audio tape has not been released. Lady Smith has heard it. She wouldn't let Robert Greene hear it. So we think that's worth looking a little more closely at her. And lo and behold, well, she's certainly, it's not relevant, strictly relevant here, but she's extremely well connected with banks and holds financial interests in many, many banks, including the Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and all the rest.
Okay.
Right, David, thank you for that.
Thank you for that.
If I could, just before we leave the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, one other piece of information for you. I have here a letter written by the inquiry to the solicitors representing Janine Rennie and the Wellbeing Foundation, Wellbeing Scotland charity. Now, Janine spoke at the opening event of Fresh Start Foundation, the launch event in Edinburgh, which was in October. And this is the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry writing to threaten her over her speech that she gave at our event. They go through various pieces of her talk, which they quote verbatim. They have transcribed it from the video that we produced. And they then say the following. They said, we are very concerned about the foregoing statements. Incidentally, the foregoing statements all seem to be accurate, right? But they say, we are very concerned about the foregoing statements. that they were intended to deter people who might otherwise come forward from providing evidence to the inquiry, or to discourage those who have already done so from cooperating with the inquiry, or in any event and circumstances where Mr. Rennie knew or believed it was likely to have that effect. It is so important that this does not happen, that the Parliament has provided that it is an offence to do so. Section 35(2) of the Inquiries Scotland Act 2005 states, a person is guilty of an offence if during the course of an inquiry he does anything that is intended to have the effect of preventing any evidence, document or other thing being given, produced or provided to the inquiry panel, or anything else he knows or believes is likely to have that effect. Now, they're threatening this woman with legal consequences, with criminal legal consequences, and telling her that she's committed an offence. Now, I understand what they're saying here. They're saying that it's an offence to prevent people from giving evidence at a public inquiry. And they're saying, well, if you provide accurate information about our conduct of our inquiry, by providing that accurate information, you make us look so bad that nobody would trust us. That will dissuade people from coming forward to the inquiry. And dissuading people by providing accurate information is just the same as prevention, and you've committed an offence. It's ludicrous. It's a horrendous position. It's basically saying that we have formed this inquiry. No one in the world is allowed to criticise this inquiry, otherwise they will be guilty of an offence under section 35(2) of the Inquiries Scotland Act 2005. It's an assault on free speech. It's very concerning indeed.
Absolutely. Now we're going to end on this because tomorrow is International Day for the Abolition of Slavery. Well, this is great stuff. Slavery is not merely a historical relic, according to the UK government. According to the International Labour Organization, more than 40 million people worldwide are victims of modern slavery. Although modern slavery is not defined in law, it's used as an umbrella term covering practices such as forced labour, debt bondage, forced marriage and human trafficking. Essentially, it refers to situations of exploitation that a person cannot refuse or leave because of threats, violence, coercion, deception and or abuse of power. Well, no problem, because International Development Secretary Penny Mordaunt has announced that UK aid is going to help over 500,000 vulnerable men, women and children around the world who have either survived modern slavery or are at risk of becoming victims. And this is ahead of the International Day for the Abolition of Slavery. She has condemned modern slavery as a global disgrace and pledged the UK's long-term commitment to stamp out the practices abroad. So, Brian, how do you think she's going to do that? You don't know. Yes, good. That's good. That's perfect.
I have no idea, because I don't believe anything these people say.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. Well, what did she say? She said the continued trade in human beings is a global disgrace. It's simply not enough. Simply not enough is being done to tackle it. And I would say that's absolutely right, because what she has done is to pledge £40 million of aid in order to sort this problem out. So just as a reminder, to put this in perspective, £40 million on top of the 35 million. I presume it's on top. I don't know that for sure. It's a bit vague. So let's say it, to give them the benefit of the doubt, and say it's on top of the 35 million pounds already pledged by her predecessor. That brings 75 million pounds of government funding towards the prevention of human slavery. And if we look at the profits, the generally acknowledged figure for the annual profit from human trafficking and modern slavery is 120 billion pounds. So that's 75 million pounds in order to prevent a profit of 120 billion pounds. How can that possibly work?
Well, it's just spin.
It's obscene.
It's obscene. It's spin, and we've shown very clearly in our wiring diagram how the Conservative Party really runs.